And here we are today with an exciting guest for this next part in the series of the digital art renaissance episodes for this podcast, Strategic Possibilities. Now, I have a special guest. Her name is Dawn Spears. How are you today, Dawn?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Emmett?
I'm doing fantastic. And what we're going to be going over today, which I think is so exciting because with this concept of everything that's happening in the art world, digital art and everything like that, there's, I believe, a lot of people who are, considering opportunities, new opportunities to not just change their careers, but also pursue things that they wanted to dream of. People that are deciding to start podcasts, to write books, to become artists and do things like that. And what's exciting right now is because Dawn originally was a scientist, a scientist, became a technical person. And right now she is also doing book illustrations, which is an incredibly, I had some experience. Well, my bachelor's was in biological science. So that entire mind shift from trying to know like regular science and that type of world to creative artwork and things like that is such a big shift. So I'm so glad that you're here, Dawn. Thank you for being here. And yeah, could you give us a little breakdown? Like how did you start out? Like, what was that story about? Because, you started out as a scientist and yeah, we'd love to hear that.
So I trained as a scientist. I was very much into science at school. I did also do art as well, but mainly science was the main thing. So I did a chemistry degree and I worked for a long time for a chemical company as a chemist. And I eventually I moved from the laboratory into, I went via marketing, but that's another story. But I eventually ended up in the IT department. So I worked as a software developer. There were very few people. They wanted some specific skills, and the people were very, very expensive. So they decided to ask for people if anyone would retrain. So I said, yeah, why not? I'll retrain. So I did that for quite a few years. And then in the end, I basically ended up having a family and I left the IT world and I had a little bit of time off work. And then when it was time to go back to work, I went to work in the local school my son was going to, and I decided that I would do my teacher training. So this is now, if you include marketing, probably about the third time I'd retrained, but hey. So I trained in secondary school rather than primary school, computer science, and I fell into getting back seriously into the art and into the actual illustration side of it, because I was, as part of my training, I had to take a teacher course for Photoshop lessons, and the person that was training me basically had this attitude that sometimes you just have to wing it. So I didn't even know the lessons were coming up. I'd never even seen Photoshop. Well, I'd heard of it, obviously, but I'd never used it, never seen the program. And suddenly I'm stuck in front of a class of 30, 15-year-old boys who are expecting me to teach them how to use Photoshop. And I have never even seen the software. So as you can imagine, that was quite challenging. Yeah, because they had some instructions in front of them, and they, as we all do when we first start to learn something, everything's going wrong. They're clicking here, clicking there, all weird stuff is happening, and I do not have a clue how to do anything other than what's on the sheet in front of me. I know pretty much the same. In fact, I know less than some of them, because some of them have got photographer parents who use it all the time, and they're having to say to me, well, if this happens, you can click over here, or basically he's just changed the screen, or this is where the color is. And it was just awful. I just wanted the ground to open up, swallow me, and go, get me out of this hell of 30, 15-year-olds just looking at me, not knowing what I'm doing. So that evening I went home and I downloaded the Photoshop trial, and I went onto Udemy and I bought a couple of Photoshop courses, and I just spent every single waking moment I could learning how to use the software, and I absolutely detested it. I thought, as soon as this module of work is over, I am never ever opening this software ever again. I just need to get all of the lesson plans out of the way while I've got the 30-day trial, get everything sorted out, and then I'll never have to worry about it for the rest of my life. So then gradually over the next few weeks of just learning alongside with the children and learning myself at home, I started to think, actually, this is actually okay. This is quite fun. There's a lot of stuff we can do here. And we started to make our own line work in the class. Like, we started to learn how to color it in and shade it and make our own illustrations and pictures and use photographs and manipulate everything. And I basically learned alongside them, trying to keep a little bit ahead by watching tutorials in the evening. And then gradually I started to just really came to love it. And that was how it all started. So I carried on from there. I took more courses. I took a course about photo manipulation and basic creating art pieces from that. And from there, I thought these would make good book covers, and that's how it all came about, really.
Yeah, well, thank you. And that's an amazing summary of, I believe a very interesting career. And with that said, so it sounds like, you mentioned retraining, and a lot of times, that can be one of the most intimidating things. Like, oh, I've spent, 10 years learning this one thing, and
Yeah.
suddenly, I'm being told that I have to learn something completely new. So this is so interesting. And before we get into some of the more details that are related to the overall like business of book illustration and, art, and like how your advice for, blooming artists, I think it's important to consider the strategies, that the personal strategies that you use to like overcome the doubt, the doubt that some people might have when they think, oh, retraining. I mean, you were thrown into a pit of 15-year-old boys,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
expected you to teach them technology out of all things that they probably already mastered. And, so like, besides just like, going home and learning it, like was there something else that like drove you? Was there other motivations, or were you just like, yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so because I did my teaching certificate is in computer science, and it also covers what's called digital literacy, which covers stuff like Photoshop, things like that. So primarily because of the software development background, that all the programming side of it was absolutely fine. So I had that. That was great. I loved doing that. I was quite within my comfort zone. Everything I'd forgotten came back to me pretty quickly. But yeah, the obviously with the Photoshop thing was a bit different, and I think it was because I had started teaching them with the programming, and that had gone so well, and I was really happy with that. That it was that feeling of just being so not able to give them what they needed. I think not able to help them very much, and also having to show vulnerability, which once you're trained actually comes much more naturally. It's fine if that situation happened to me now, I would be fine. I would just say, it does sometimes if we try something new, I say, well, look, I don't know this, you're going to have to help me as well, we'll learn together. But when you're training, I kind of you seem to have this feeling that you have to be perfect at everything, which is kind of daft when you think about it because you're training. But there's also always somebody watching you as well. So I think it was just, I just didn't want to stand there and feel like completely useless. So the way that I've always approached everything is if there is like a problem like that, I will see everything I can try and learn to get around it. So that's that. I guess that's from the science training, is like you've always been with a problem and you're constantly finding ways that don't work and trying to find something that does work. So maybe it was that and sheer determination that I thought, well, I'm not going to stand there again in front of class and not have a clue what I'm talking about. And it's not fair on the kids, is it? They're there to learn, not there to help me. So I think that was
Yeah.
it, really, just determination and not wanting to feel like I didn't know what I was doing. So
Yeah. Okay. So that's super powerful, because like when you get into those types of situations, I mean, it could be overwhelming, and then, you go home and you feel like stressed out, but it sounds like, there was something that drove you to really care and to spend, I mean, I don't know, how much time would you say that you actually spent to learn the tools, like I don't know, each day?
hours. So when you're training, you don't have the same workload that you do when you're actually teaching full time. So when you get home, you have time to do prep and some other stuff as well. So I would say, it was probably it would have taken all evening. I don't know, 4 or 5 hours in the evening, maybe when I got home, 5 hours learning,
Yeah.
practicing, and I made sure that I practiced every single day. because I didn't have very long till the next lesson. So I thought, thought to myself, well, if I can find something and I can show them that I can learn how to do, and I can then show them how to do it for the next lesson, then that kept me going. So a long time, but I would say probably 4 or 5 hours. And even once the module stopped, because I had really got into trying to learn Photoshop, then I carried on going. I just kept going. So I thought the last thing I want to do now, I've spent all this time learning it, is forget it. And that was 4 years ago, maybe 6 years ago now. I can't remember exactly, but it was quite a while ago.
Well, I think this concept of learning strategies for Photoshop and art are very helpful. So was there like a sort of thing you did? Like, did you just read a book and do exercises, or did you like come up with your own exercises, or like, what was that?
Do you mean for my own teaching, or for the, because I did a bit of both actually. For the class teaching, I found other lessons that I could adapt, things that I could, particularly people that had put stuff online, particularly suited for teenagers. So that was fine. But for my own learning, I did a lot of courses on Udemy, and mainly I was doing stuff with photographs then. And I also found another course that dealt with photo manipulation and art and adding textures and things like that. I did quite a deep dive into all the Photoshop tools, and I started doing that. As part of that, I didn't like using other people's photographs to make artwork. I wanted to use my own stuff. So I started getting back into art and painting the stuff in Photoshop by hand, I had one of those cheap little I can't remember, but just one of the very, very cheap drawing tablets. And it was from there, when I was on Udemy, I thought there must be something more on here about digital art. And it was there that I found Hardy's courses, and I signed up to do, basically bought those and did those. So that was instrumental really in learning techniques, because otherwise you're on your own, aren't you? It's quite, figure it all out by yourself is
I think it's so interesting when people say that they're self-taught, because I think it's like, it's one thing to sit there and just draw things, but it's another to like really learn to accelerate some of the things that you do by finding really smart people who are professionals who know what they're doing, and just picking up great stuff from them. So it's such a different way of learning, I think. And some of it's actually like self-taught, and then the other stuff you really got to just take the effort to find the right people. And that's what's so beautiful about the time right now with this whole digital art stuff, is you can learn so much online. There's experts everywhere.
It's like a dream come true. I wish that I was back to being 16, 17 now, because my life would have been I would have taken a totally different path, because all this stuff, I'm 50 now. So this stuff was really in its infancy, and I went to an all-girls school, so we had a computer room, but we used to go in there and play games at lunchtime, but very few people took computer science or anything like that. And there was the technical drawing was all done by hand. I couldn't have done that because I did the traditional art and then all the sciences, so I didn't have any room left for any more subjects. So I think if I had my time now, I look at my son, he's a teenager now, and all the opportunity he's got and the different subjects he can do at school, it's just fantastic. I think, wow, it's mind-blowing. You can start from so young and get so good so quickly. That would be, I'd love that. Really.
Yeah. And I and also on top of that, like, this idea, which I hope you'll shed some wisdom on this, but the idea of finding clients, like no longer do you have to, sit at home and draw and then go out and try to like, hawk all, I don't know if to hawk all your art, on the streets or anything, or, as Leonardo da Vinci probably did, went up to the castle of the Medicis and, tried to like mingle with them. I don't know what he did, but like just thinking of the traditional physical way versus, some of the stuff that great people are doing right now. So, with that said, so you have an amazing website. I've seen your book covers. They look fantastic, very creative and fantasy. And like, I definitely get the vibe of, a very, very like dramatic and epic stories from your work. So from that standpoint, I mean, you have so many different talents, from chemistry to IT, software, art. I mean, there's so many things. And you're also a business person if you're starting a business like that. I mean, what I mean, just to start off, like, what was the biggest challenge in starting your own book art business? Like, what was that like?
It's the biggest challenge, I think, is, I can speak particularly for book covers on this, obviously that's how I have most experience with. The biggest challenge of that is getting what the market wants rather than what you want to make. I think that was the biggest challenge for me, because I have very much a tendency to make what I really like, and quite often that's not really going to work for an author. That was the biggest thing I had to overcome, was start to think about, actually, what is it they need me to be making rather than what is it I want to be making. And that was huge, and I still fight that now quite a bit, but especially with because the book covers, I have some publishing houses as well, but I have mainly independent or indie author clients. And there's two streams to the book cover business. There's like the pre-made business where they buy them off the shelf already done, and then there is the custom covers where they will give you a brief, and it's pretty much like any other illustration job or art job there, where you're working to their brief. So for the pre-made ones, particularly within a particular book genre, they have to fit into that genre, or they do not stand a chance of being sold, unless you're very lucky and someone wants to take a flyer on it, or they're a big author and they see it. So yeah, you have to really narrow it down, and I still am not always 100% on that, because I like to make these cinematic epic scenes, and sometimes that's not always what's wanted. So
Yeah, absolutely. I
yeah.
mean, it's definitely a challenge because we all have these ideas as artists, and you want to get them out there, but at the same time, if you're working as a commercial artist, you definitely have to often
Yeah.
find, listen, and communicate with whatever the other person, your client or your person commissioning you wants. So here, can you give an example of, like, give an example of that, of something that you love to create, but and you did, like, briefly saying that you love to create epic stuff, but can you give me another example of, like, something that you wanted to do but the client wanted something completely different? Or
Oh yeah, I've had quite a few of those. So I've learned that actually sometimes when the clients will give you a brief, and what they've put in their brief isn't really what they want. So if they say something like, I don't know, trying to think of an actual real life example. Yeah, so as Dragon one, I did with some renders a while ago, and the customer was like, well, I want this dragon coming out of a portal. It's got to be epic. Well, no, it wasn't coming out of a portal, so it's coming over the edge of a cliff. The dragon's coming over the edge of a cliff, the character's in front of it, it's got to be epic scale up. So I did the dragon, put everything in, really proud of it. Looked, it was only rough, but it was all like there, thought it looked really nice. This is exactly what they've asked for, sent it off. And he's like, well, that is totally not what I was thinking of at all. I think he basically said, I think it just looks dreadful. So it's like,
wow, that
okay.
that is harsh.
So yeah, it was a bit harsh. I went, well, not being rude, but that's what you asked for. So yeah.
So what was like the result of that? I mean, did you keep them as a client and give that, like?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I basically, that one, I said to him, look, I pushed back, and I did some more changes to it that he asked for. He still wasn't happy, and I said, look, okay, you need to have a think about what you want, and you need to get back to me when you can express exactly what you wanted me to do, because I'm not really clear. And actually, he never came back about that one, but he did come back subsequently with some other suggestions, and I about for new projects, and I very politely did not take any more work from him,
Yeah.
shall we say.
Well,
because I thought, you can't, there's no point, because if you spend 5 or 6 hours doing something, I'm very much of I know a lot of people don't necessarily work like this, but I very much try to run my stuff on a trust basis. So I don't take payment until the cover is finished, because I feel that last thing I want to do is someone to think, well, she's promised all this and hasn't delivered, and we've still paid however many, hundreds of dollars for it, and it's not. So I don't like doing that, and I very rarely will take it. Only if it's someone I completely don't know, well, then I may take a deposit, but because I want them to feel like they've had good value, and I know that there's a risk in there, but so far I've been very, very lucky. But with that particular one, so obviously that was quite a few hours and then no money at all. And yeah, I mean, being told that my art was dreadful. So
Yeah, and I mean, in
yeah.
one sense, like, I imagine that I'm just seeing the work that you have right now. I mean, obviously, the person, there's something else going on there, probably,
Yeah,
right?
I
Like,
suspect so. I suspect so. I can laugh back now because it's quite a few years ago. But at the time, I was livid. I was like, "Hang on a minute, he has just said that this is dreadful," and I was saying to my friends, showing them, so, "Do you think this is dreadful?" And they're like, "No, it's great. What's wrong with it?" I went, well, apparently it's just dreadful. So
yeah.
yeah, it
So,
wasn't.
so, so
It
here's a
wasn't good.
question. I mean, a lot of us artists, we can be sensitive to the stuff that we create. I mean, we put our time, our effort, plus however many hours just to get up to that point, just in training alone. So from your perspective, I mean, you said looking back, it's funny, but like, was there something that did it like put you in like a down mood and you stopped doing art for a little bit, or like, what was your strategy to like
Um,
tackle that?
it made me very angry actually, because I did feel that it's totally disrespectful. I would think there are ways and means of saying you don't like something without being like that. And I think, yeah, I did. Yeah, it's hard to, and everyone says you've got to grow really thick skin, and you have, but sometimes it is hard, and sometimes harsh words do get through, and you think, So how did I come to terms with it? I think I just carried on. I just decided that actually this was probably a client that I didn't want to work with long term. And when you working for yourself, that's a choice you have, and just carried on and focused on my other. I have some absolutely delightful people that I do work for, and I focused on that and think, well, those are the people that really matter.
Yeah.
So it's just and I think it's going to, at some point, if you have arts career, it's going to happen to everyone, isn't it? You're going to ultimately read or see or hear something bad about your work, and you're going to feel hurt by it. And I think that's fine, but you have to then move on from it. You can't dwell on it, because it's just one person's opinion, and what one person hates, someone else loves, and that's the whole thing with art. It doesn't matter if someone dislikes it, because somebody else will love it, and as long as you're happy with it. We're our own harshest critics 9 times out of 10 anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and for sure, like, really thank you for sharing that, though. I mean, that's
it's
like,
all right.
how many people are willing to really put that out there? Like, what I mean, that's some, it's one thing to like get this type of feedback on like Facebook, or have like a review with your boss, but like to have a client just say that directly, but then going through it and then continuing to build your business on top of it. And with that, that's really powerful. So
Yeah,
with
it's one client, isn't it? It's one person in a whole world full of people, and you think that actually it's not worth dwelling on. It's not worth dwelling on. It's just keep,
yeah,
anyway. If you can take revenge by getting better. That's how I would think about it.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So with the book illustration world as you see it now, with that business and everything, I mean, what are your thoughts on where it's going? I mean, for concept artists, for illustrators, anyone who's like looking for opportunity, not sure what they want to do, is book illustration like viable? Or what are your thoughts on that for someone,
Um,
just getting started or with some art skills? But yeah.
yeah, I think it is. I think it is viable. I think it's very accessible. The market is big. I think for particularly for pre-made covers, that is starting to become more challenging, because a lot of people have made a lot of covers very quickly. So there's quite a lot out there on the market, which is very good for the authors, maybe not so much for the designers. But if you're an illustrator and you're hand drawing them, then I see those doing particularly well, and I see those people getting quite a lot of work. So I think for the illustrators, because that's more of a rare skill than say photo manipulating something, or not to take away from that, but it seems to be that there is a lot more people that are getting into that quicker than there is, because it takes time to learn how to illustrate properly. So with that kind of thing, I think definitely my advice would be, before you start, because I see this a lot with the new designers, is that they will go straight in and start trying to sell their designs. In fact, I did this myself, I'll be honest. You go in, you make some things, you think they look okay to you, and you think, oh yeah, I'm going to put them up for sale, actually they're not. They're either not one genre, or they're not finished to the required standard. Or the big one for book cover design, maybe not for people that work for publishing houses, but for the indie market, is that we do the typography on them as well. So that is a whole different subject in itself, and that is where a lot of particularly new people fall down, because that's got to be right, and it's got to be on genre, and it's very, very difficult to find decent training as well to learn how to do it. And it's moving more into the like sort of graphic design side of it rather than the illustration side, so it is a different thing. So those would be the things I would look at now, and also specialize in your genres. Like I tend to do mainly fantasy, epic fantasy. I would do horror because I love horror, but there's not much call for that, but I love doing it if I get the chance. And things like pulpy fiction, sort of heavy outline comic book stuff, if I get the chance to do that, I will jump on it because I love doing that. But I would never do things like romance, or particularly genres that I don't read. So I will read fantasy and I'll read sci-fi, that kind of comic books. But I would never pick up a romance novel. So I'm not really I don't really know what I'm looking for. So specialize in, some people only specialize in one, some people do 3 or 4. It's very rare to find someone that will do all the genres, because it's quite a lot and if you're not really into it, then it's quite difficult to, I don't think I could bear to do romance. I've never made one, so I don't know.
Wow.
So I think that would be I think that would be my main advice, really. Yeah, specialize early, get the genres nailed down that you want to do, practice a lot, don't put your work up for sale until it's ready. And if you get yourself into a good support group, they will tell you honestly whether it's ready or not, and focus on typography as well as the image, because they work together.
Yeah, and when you mean typography, you mean like the font that's used for?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, the whole type that's on the whole type that's on a book cover. So the author's name, the title. There's quite often a series name or a tagline or something, or the bit that they'll say USA Today best-selling author. All of that's all comes under typography. And there's a few sort of like unwritten rules that you kind of stumble across about which fonts go together, which don't, how many different fonts you can get away with using, the fact that nobody will very rarely will use something in italics, and that's another thing that's just come to me actually. The big thing, the indie market is completely different to the publishing houses, because if they're publishing very well-known authors, it doesn't matter what they stick on the cover, the book will sell. Stephen King's next book is going to sell even if they just had a blank cover with the title and by Stephen King on it. It wouldn't matter what's on it. So you can't necessarily base what you're doing on what you see in the bookstore, because big authors are selling, whereas indie authors need something to grab the buyer's attention. And then they consequently end up being very, as you've seen, they're very bright, they're very vibrant. It reminds me of old gin palaces in London that with those very elaborate, they're all very elaborate adverts really for the books. So yeah,
I mean, the book cover alone, I mean, could capture someone's attention and make them wonder, ooh, should I read this? Especially when it's genre based. It's like, oh, does this elicit some emotion in me that makes me want to say yes.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point, because if you do have the wrong, if you're giving the wrong genre message with your book title, if you're an indie author, then that will seriously hurt your reviews, because people do not like picking up something they think is going to be a cozy mystery and finding that it's a hardcore sci-fi. They're going to hang on. This isn't what I bought. So that's a big thing, definitely.
Yeah. Right. And okay, so I really appreciate you sharing all of that really great wisdom right there about, how to really kind of like get focused in your career if you want to get into book illustration. Some great advice on where the market is for that. So let's say, you did some thinking. You said you wanted to be like a sci-fi, or you want to be fantasy or whatever, a book cover illustrator. What's your tips on finding your first client? Should you go work for a publishing house, or should you just start putting stuff online?
Well, I think if you can get a job working for a publishing house, that is fantastic, because that's going to be steady, and it's a bit like when we were talking in our class the other day about jobs that are permanent jobs versus freelance jobs. If you can get a permanent job, then that's a brilliant start. And also you'll be working with other people that are experienced, and you'll have a bit of a leg up like that. So, but if you can't, if that's not possible, I would, the way that I started, there are some sites that basically act like marketplaces for book covers, primo book covers, and you can upload your work to them, and you can hope to get. That's how I started. That's really, I did that. I did a lot of that for practice, and that kind of got me to the point of what isn't going to sell. And then after that, I started, most of my marketing comes from Facebook groups dedicated to book covers and indie authors and things like that. And then from there, once you have a couple of clients, they recommend you, and it spreads from there. So and some full-time authors will write very quickly, so they can sometimes need a lot of covers, and once you get a good working relationship with them, then they do tend to come back as well, which is really nice. You get to know them and get to know what they like. Sometimes I do, if I get the time, I will read some of the books. I don't always get time to read them, but the ones that I've read have been really, really good. So
yeah, wow.
Shout out to all those indie authors that work so hard, because they do put a lot of effort into it, and they're the good ones. The good books are every bit as good as something you'd buy in the bookshop. So
yeah, okay. So I mean, for anyone looking to get into book illustration, I mean, getting a job at a publishing house is one thing, but you shared some great ideas there, going on Facebook, joining groups, finding supportive communities.
Yeah.
So what is your tips on like finding people that are like, you see somebody post that they need a book illustration, you just message them right away? Like what's your advice in that overall process of building that relationship?
Usually what will happen, the way, because I don't do a lot of other social media other than Facebook. I try to keep it to a minimum, so I know I probably am missing out on things there, but I just think there's only so many hours in the day, and I've used Facebook for ages, so that's the one that I stick to. I know that it's not so much for younger audience now, but normally what will happen there, in one of the groups, somebody will put up a post saying I'm looking for a book cover designer to create something like this, and give them a brief outline and normally their budget as well. And then you can then reply to them and see with and just say, so show them some examples and say, you can contact me if you want to take it further, and they then have a choice of who they use. But from that, what I found from that is it's not necessarily those jobs that you post on might not be the ones that are getting back to you, but other people see that and they see your work on there, and they'll find you through that. So even if it's not, because obviously sometimes they get quite a few replies, but that isn't where it ends. You only need one person to see your example cover you've put up there, or your example, and say, actually I'm looking for something like that, and then they've got your information, they can send you a message. Or I always put my website link on there as well, because I have a contact form there as well. So so that's how I would suggest. That's one thing I would suggest actually for people starting out, is to get their own website. It doesn't necessarily have to have a sales page. It can be fairly simple, but just something where there's a showcase of them.
What's a good tool you recommend to actually do that? Like, you're an artist, you don't have technical skill. Well, I'm not saying you, but like in general.
I don't have particularly good web building skills. So I use Wix for mine, but I don't know whether that's necessarily the best. I have I also sell some stock images for renders and things like that. And for that I use WordPress, and I found that for a cheap option, actually, WordPress is pretty good. It's a little bit of a steeper learning curve than Wix, because that does it all for you, but the end result is probably as good. And then of course there's ArtStation. I think a lot of book cover artists have ArtStation pages, and DeviantArt is the other one that's really popular, although that's not my chosen one, but I think ArtStation probably more so than that. I think anywhere, as long as you've got somewhere that you can direct them to a portfolio, because all you need is someone to click on it and then see something that they like, or well, once they've seen your sample, somewhere that they can see more of your work if they want to, so they know you haven't just created this one cover and got lucky, kind of thing. And then once you have success with one, and you get a couple of number ones on the best-selling new entries, new releases list and things like that, then I will publicize that in groups and say, oh, congratulations to the author, with a little screenshot of the orange tag, as it's called, from Amazon that says #1 new release or whatever. That's because obviously that's what
Yeah.
people really want. So yeah.
Yeah, and they want to also see, like, what is the design that helped them do that? Because I
Yeah.
think, for, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, for indie artists, I mean, the only thing they see is the cover, unless they show like a look inside of what else is there. But
Yeah, exactly. And you've got to get past that. You've got to get to the look inside bit. So you've got to have them clicking on that on your cover. That's the first step. And it's like you're presented with hundreds, well, pages upon pages of different books, and if you've got to have something for someone to find it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been some amazing stuff. I mean, you went from a career as working in chemistry, and now you're doing you're an entrepreneur in digital book cover illustration and all of that. So, just looking ahead, I mean, do you see yourself like expanding the business more, or do you want to focus on illustration? Like, you're learning digital painting as well. So, like, just to get an idea, I mean, I think it's important to, hear not just people's current, like, previous strategies to, like, do great stuff, but also to get an idea of, like, how you build and grow a business. Like, how do you plan that? How do you develop that?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting one, because yes, I will obviously carry on doing the book covers because I really, really enjoy doing the book covers. But recently I have been promoting more of the illustration side of it. So like last week I was lucky enough to do some colouring pages for a book it's still related to the book covers. It's related to a book that's coming out, and that was really fun. So that was line art for those. That was really enjoyable. And I also, because I've always used a lot of 3D models in my renders and for my covers, I've started doing my own modeling. So I will probably push more into that side of it as well, with the 3D modeling side of it. I think I know it sounds like I'm kind of trying to do too many things, but I've always sort of switched around a little bit between what I like to do, because I think if I spend all of my time painting, it starts to get feel a little bit tired, and it starts to get a little bit samey, and I sort of get stuck in a bit of a rut. So like today, for instance, I've got a job working on a sculpt for a particular, it is for a book cover, but it's a character for a book cover, and it's quite complicated. So I thought, well, today I'm going to brush up on some of my ZBrush skills. So today I spent going through some training for that, to get that up to the level that I need to be, so I can complete this job. So I think things like that, just all in the same area, but just different sides of it, different skills.
That is quite a lot, because
Yeah, I know.
because I have tried to learn like different tools, like, Photoshop, and then try to do some 3D, and it's like, it is quite a lot to switch between, because the skills are different when you're doing the 3D. I mean, it's completely different than, doing something in 2D.
Totally different.
Yeah.
It's also, it's a really interesting one, because that was another thing that came out of having to teach the kids. It wasn't when I was doing my training. This is subsequently, because I still teach 1 day a week in primary school, and we got given a 3D printer. So obviously they're like, well, you're the technical person, so here you go. So I thought, right, okay, great. So I started looking at it. I started looking at Tinkercad and things we could do with the kids, and I just could not get my head around it at all. I like, whoa, this is just so alien. And we did stuff with the children in the classes, and they picked, because their brains are so elastic, they picked it up instantly. They found all this stuff, and they made this amazing stuff. And I'm like, how did you do that? And got them to show me. And then gradually, someone said to me, oh, they needed a bit to fix the toilet door and they couldn't buy it. So they said, do you think, if I say show me, so do you think you could make that on the 3D printer? And I went, well, leave it with me, I'll give it a go. So I measured it all, tried to work out. I thought, yeah, okay, I'll managed to get that made, and I made a few other bits and pieces to repair stuff, and suddenly it started to make a little bit more sense. And then I thought, oh, actually, it's almost like your brain kind of works it out what you need to do. The more you practice, I suppose it's like everything, the more you practice, the better you get it. So it started, there was a sort of shift in my thinking, where suddenly I could see things as simple shapes rather than as one large complicated object, lots of small simple objects. And it came from there. And then I went at the start of the COVID pandemic when we were all locked down. I had downloaded a trial version of ZBrush, and I thought, oh, I need something to do. So I started learning that, and I really got into that, because before that I'd been using a different package, and I think ZBrush is much more artist friendly than some of the other things, because it's still you're sculpting, and it's much more of a natural process rather than extrude this face, bevel this one. It's
Yeah.
much more fluid.
Oh, interesting. Because I haven't tried ZBrush. I've tried a Blender, but I've heard so many great things about ZBrush. So what I'm getting
I
is
like
that
it.
it feels more intuitive for you.
Yeah, for me it did. It's the interface is a bit tricky to learn, but a bit like, it reminds me of Photoshop actually. It's got a learning curve. The interface is tricky but it's all designed to work with a pen and a tablet. So once you get used to it, it kind of makes perfect sense. But to start with, it's a bit like that first day is so painful when you're just like, oh, I can't do it. I just can't. But once you get over that hump, I really enjoy it. I think it's got this really good piece of software.
I also heard, I'm not sure of this because I haven't used it, but I think the typical general idea is that ZBrush is primarily for like organic shapes versus
and it's particularly historically, definitely, and they have got a lot more hard surface tools now, and I think once you're used to the way it works, I get on okay with it now. But sometimes some things that would be really easy in, say, like Maya or in Blender, can be unnecessarily complicated in ZBrush for that reason. So I think the conclusion I've come to recently is it's probably useful to have a little bit of a traditional modeling tool as well, which I'm starting to learn Maya now, so I've got a bit of that as well. But most stuff there is a way to do it in ZBrush, but the workflow may not be as quick or as simple.
Yeah.
So it's the place of both.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I really liked how you shared the story, of that, but also this tackling challenges of when someone said something, make the 3D printer thing for the, with the door. I mean, like,
I could have just said no, couldn't I?
Yeah, you could just, I'm not sure. So when you like, when they asked you if you could do it, you said you'd give it a go, but like, in your mind, like, were you like, oh, I can't do this, but I will? Or like, what was the...
I was in my mind, I was like, I'll never be able to do this, but I'll give it a go. Because that one, to be honest, that's the zero risk strategy, because that's just the maintenance man at work wants something that he can't actually get the part for. So to save them buying a whole new door or hinge or whatever, they say, can you make this? If I can't make it, I can just go, do you know what? I'm sorry, I've not been able to. It's fine. No one's going to say anything. So actually, it was a really quite a zero risk one. So... And I did make it, and as far as I know, I haven't checked. As far as I know, the bit's still there, it's still working.
Yeah.
So,
hey, as long as
it was just, it was a bit of trial and error, and the software I was using didn't have particularly good measurements, so I had to print it a couple of times and make sure till it fit. But we got there. But yeah, I didn't think to start with. I was thinking, oh, there's no way. But,
yeah. Okay. And one thing I think that would be fun to wrap up with is, I was just reading this book, or listening to the audio book at least. It's called Atomic Habits. I can't remember the name of the author. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically the idea is that I think there's a quote in there. You don't fall to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your system, or something like that, right? The basic idea is that you could go shoot for high goals, but no matter what, you're not gonna... It's not like you go to the moon, you aim for the moon, you fall on the moon. It's you aim for the moon, but you fall back to whatever your system that you created, right? So like a routine or something. So do you have like any artistic routines, or like, things that you do to like get it in the zone, or anything like that?
Oh, I do have one, and it's I don't know whether I should share it because it's a bit
Okay,
weird.
yeah, no worries.
No, I will share it, because at least everyone think, gosh, at least they'll see this and they'll go, well, I'm not quite as weird as that. So I have we have travertine style bathroom tiles in our bathroom. I go in, and if I go in there and look at them, I just have to look at them one or two for a little while, and I see all of a sudden I'll start seeing all of these fantastic things that will prompt me to. So like I might look, and they can be different. So I might look at the one day and I'll see, I can see a dragon, and there's that idea appearing then for an image with the dragon, or there's a crocodile, or there's a girl peeking out from behind a door. There'll be loads of different shapes, pareidolia, isn't it? It's called, and you see faces and everything. So like that. So I will look at something like just a random image, particularly on my bathroom tiles. So there's so many different ones, and I will always find something that I think, oh, that's an idea, and then I'll go from there. And I did put that, I put that as a comment on something. Someone said, what do you do for inspiration? And I put that, and I'm sure they just thought that I was being really just being really silly, but it actually is what I would do. I'm thinking about it. I've always done it without even realizing, because even when I was a kid, we had different bathroom tiles, and I used to see all kinds of things in those as well. So maybe it's just me.
Well,
but yeah,
yeah. I mean,
and
Mhm.
and I look at a lot of art books as well. I do, like anyone, I think that most of us that are into art, we have a lot of material in the house. I have loads of coffee table books of different artists, and comic books, and all sorts of things that I will look at those, and particularly ones that feature some of my favorite artists.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such an interesting routine, and thank you for sharing it, because sometimes, like, most people think of like looking in the clouds, and you're
Yeah, that
imagining
works
shapes.
too. Yeah, that works.
But to find another way, something that works for you, right? Like, what I took from your story is not just doing what is typical, but doing what works for you, whatever that is. So that's awesome. And this is something that you've done for quite a while, right? Like you mentioned.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So
Yeah.
by the way, was there like a moment when you realized that, oh, I do this and this is a creative like thing for me? Or was that just something you did always and you never even thought about
I think when I realized was when I answered that question honestly that someone had asked. That's when I thought that's what I do, and I didn't really think about it in that way until then, because it's not, it doesn't have to be. I'll see stuff when I'm all over the place, but that's particularly one that is very easily accessible and is always different. So, but that I think that's when it hit me, and I am. But there was never any reply, so I am pretty certain they thought, oh, she's just taking the, taking the mick out of us here, because this is not. No one's going to do that.
Yeah.
But they do. I do, and I'm sure lots of other people do as well.
Right, definitely. And I think to wrap that idea, I think it's important that what I'm taking away is you're not saying that everybody should go look at bathroom tiles, right?
No.
But that the overall idea is whatever works for you. I mean, grab
anything that inspires you. I play a lot of computer games, and I get really inspired by the art that's in those. And if anything that inspires you, I think is brilliant. Take time to look at stuff you really enjoy looking at, and then that's where it'll come from there, rather than, there's no right or wrong there, is there? If it works, it works.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. And thank you for being here. And just to wrap things up, I mean, what's the best way for anybody who is looking to get into book illustration, or is looking for an illustrator, or that type of work? What's the best way for them to reach you?
I have a contact form on my website. My website is www.dawnydawny.com. So it's Dawn with a Y twice. That's because that was my name that I used, or I still do use, for a lot of gaming, and that was the first thing that popped into my head when I signed up for it. So I was kind of stuck. So it's dawnydawny.com. And there's
Cool.
also, I have the other one I have for my stock renders and model renders is mythicstock.com, and I think there's a contact me on there as well. So both of those, and on Discord, I think I'm just, on ArtStation I'm just Dawn Spears, and likewise on Discord.
Great. Well, all of that information is going to be included in the description for this podcast. So one more time, Dawn, thank you for spending this time with me to share all of your great stories with everybody. And have a wonderful night, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you. You're welcome.